Commander Thelis floated in the command center of the massive, crystal ship called Harmony's Light. His four eyes stared at the destruction happening around him. The beautiful ship that had been his home for 20 years was now broken and dying. Air leaked out through long cracks in the crystal walls, making a terrible hissing sound. "Another ship is gone, sir," said Officer Kren, his voice shaking with fear. The peaceful dawn just disappeared. The Morthok bioships ate it alive. Watched through the main viewing screen as green bioplasma consumed what was left of his fleet. The Morthok ships weren't made of metal like normal spacecraft. They were living creatures the size of cities, with tentacles that could grab other ships and acid that could melt through any armor. Worst of all, they were learning. Every time the Villani fired their elegant energy weapons, the Morthok ships adapted and became stronger. "Sir, we've tried everything," reported Science Officer Vex from her station. "Her quantum disruptors, plasma cannons, even the new ionic pulse weapons. Nothing works anymore. They're evolving faster than we can fight them." The bridge shook as another explosion rocked their ship. Thelis gripped his command chair with all 6 of his long, thin fingers. For 300 years, the galaxy had been peaceful. Wars were fought with honor, with rules, with respect for life. The Villani had perfected the art of civilized combat, where few died and conflicts ended, quickly through diplomacy. But the Morthok Empire was different. They didn't want territory or resources. They wanted to consume everything living in the galaxy. Their bioships would eat entire planets, turning all life into fuel for their endless growth. They had already destroyed 12 solar systems, and now they were coming for the Villani homeworld. "How many ships do we have left?" Thelis asked quietly. 17 out of 200, sir," came the bitter reply. "The defense fleet is finished." Thelis closed all 4 of his eyes and thought about his 3 children back on Villani Prime. They would die today unless he did something desperate. Something that went against everything the Villani believed in. "Open a channel to the restricted frequencies," he ordered. The entire bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what the restricted frequencies were for. They were for contacting the monsters that lived in the forbidden part of the galaxy. The creatures that even the Morthok whispered about in fear. "Sir, you can't mean ... double quotes," Officer Kren started to say. "I mean exactly that," Thelis said firmly. "Contact the Deathworlders." "But sir, they're worse than the Morthok. The old records say they're demons. They fight without honor, without mercy. They use weapons that destroy everything, including themselves. They're from a world so terrible that nothing civilized could ever survive there. And that's exactly why we need them," Thelis replied. "Send the message to Sol3. Tell them we're dying. Tell them we need their help." Officer Kren's hands shook as he worked the communication system. "Sir, what if they refuse? What if they decide to help the Morthok instead? Then we die with dignity," Thelis said. "But if they accept, maybe our children live to see another day." The message went out across the galaxy, traveling faster than light toward the yellow star system that all civilized races avoided. The signal carried the Villani's desperate plea to the creatures that lived on the 3rd planet from their sun, the world they called Earth, as the transmission disappeared into hyperspace. Thelis wondered if he had just saved his people or doomed the entire galaxy. The humans were said to be the most dangerous species ever discovered. They came from a world where everything tried to kill everything else, where the very air was poisoned and the gravity could crush normal beings. But right now, as he watched another Morthok bioship tear apart the last of his escorts, Thelis decided that maybe the galaxy needed its monsters after all. Admiral Kim Junho stood in the command center of the massive warship Iron Resolve, watching the strange alien message play for the 5th time. The holographic display showed symbols and numbers that looked nothing like any human language. But after 6 hours of work, the computer had finally figured out what the aliens were trying to say. "This is incredible, sir," said Lieutenant Park. "Minwoo, from his station near the communications array, we're getting our first real message from outer space. But there's something weird about it. They're not trying to be friendly. They're asking for help." Kim walked over to Park's station and looked at the translated text on the screen. The message was desperate and scared. These aliens called themselves the Villani, and they were being destroyed by something called the Morthok Empire. What? Caught Kim's attention was how they described humans. "They're calling us Deathworlders," Park continued, pointing to a section of the translation. "According to their records, Earth is classified as a Class 12 hazard world. That's the most dangerous rating they have. They've been avoiding our entire solar system for hundreds of years." Kim raised an eyebrow. "Avoiding us? Why?" "Because they think we're monsters, sir. Their files say that Earth is so deadly that nothing civilized could survive here. They list things like our gravity, our weather, our diseases, even our animals, as impossible dangers. They can't believe anything intelligent could evolve on a world like ours." The Admiral looked around the command center at his crew. Lieutenant Jung was eating a sandwich at her post. Ensign Cho was laughing at something on his personal tablet. Commander Yoon was doing push-ups in the corner during his break. They all looked pretty normal to Kim. "So let me get this straight," Kim said slowly. "Aliens think we're so dangerous that they've been hiding from us for centuries. But now they're so desperate that they're asking the monsters for help." "That's exactly right, sir," Park replied. "And there's more. You're fighting something called the Morthok Empire. From what I can understand, these Morthok use living ships that eat other ships. They're consuming entire planets and turning everything into fuel for their war machine." Kim walked back to his command chair and sat down. He'd been in the Space Navy for 20 years, but this was the first time he'd ever had to make a decision that would affect all of humanity. Earth had been alone in the universe for so long that most people had stopped believing in aliens. "Signal the fleet commanders," he ordered. "Get me Captain Lee on the Soul's Pride, Captain Choi on the Busan Thunder, and Captain Yoon on the Incheon's Fury. Tell them we're about to make history." Within minutes, the faces of his 3 senior captains appeared on the main screen. They all looked excited and nervous at the same time. "Listen carefully," Kim began. "We just received a distress call from an alien civilization. They're under attack and asking for our help. But here's the interesting part. They think we're the most dangerous species in the galaxy." Captain Lee laughed. "Dangerous? We're just humans." "Not to them," Kim replied. "To them, we're Deathworlders, creatures from a world so terrible that they can't imagine how we survive. And now they need those same creatures to save them from something even worse." The captains exchanged glances. This was bigger than any of them had imagined. "What are your orders, sir?" asked Captain Choi. Kim stood up and looked at the star charts showing the location of the Villani system. It was 47 light years away, but with their new faster-than-light drives, they could be there in 3 days. "We're going to meet our neighbors," he said with a grin. "Power up the fusion drives. Load the nuclear missiles. Charge the railguns. It's time to show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do." The space around the Villani home system looked like a graveyard, and broken pieces of crystal ships floated everywhere, glowing with the last bits of energy before going dark forever. "Commander." Thelis stood on the bridge of his dying flagship, watching another massive city ship get torn apart by the Morthok. Bio-weapons, then something impossible happened. 40-7 new ships appeared out of nowhere, materializing at the edge of the system like ghosts becoming real. But these weren't the elegant crystal vessels that the Villani used or the horrible living creatures that the Morthok rode. These ships were made of thick, dark metal and looked like they were built for war. "By the ancient stars," whispered Science. Officer Vex, staring at her instruments. "Those ships are using controlled nuclear explosions to move. They're literally riding on top of tiny suns." Thelis couldn't believe what he was seeing. The human ships were accelerating toward the battle faster than anything he had ever witnessed. The Villani ships used clean anti-gravity drives that barely disturbed space around them. The Morthok. Bioships moved by swimming through space like fish through water, but these human vessels were pushing themselves forward with the same force that powered stars. "How do they survive inside those ships?" asked Officer Kryn, his voice full of amazement. "The radiation from those nuclear drives should kill any living thing." "Maybe they're not really living," Vex replied quietly. "Maybe they're machines, or maybe they're something worse. The largest human ship came closer to the Volani flagship. It was covered in weapons that looked primitive but terrifying. Instead of the smooth energy projectors that civilized races used, this ship had long metal tubes that could fire solid objects, and missile ports that could launch nuclear warheads. "This is the Terran Defense Force ship, Soul's Pride," came a voice over the communication system. "We received your distress call. Please identify yourself." Thelis activated his translator and replied, "This is Commander Thelis of the Volani Confederation. We... We sent the message to your system. We need help." "Roger that, Commander. We're here to assist."
Hey!
"Can you send a representative to our ship for face-to-face contact?" Thelis looked at his crew. Meeting the Deathworlders in person was something no civilized being had ever done before. But they were out of options. "I'll send Ambassador Crix," he decided. "He's our best diplomatic officer." Ambassador Crix had met thousands of different alien species during his long career. He thought he was prepared for anything. But when he materialized on the human ship using his teleportation device, he immediately knew he had made a terrible mistake. The gravity hit him like a crushing weight. His legs buckled and he fell to his knees, gasping for breath.
Ow.
The air around him was thick with oxygen and nitrogen in amounts that would be poisonous to most life forms. But worse than that was the feeling of being surrounded by predators. The humans standing around him had eyes that faced forward like hunters. Their mouths showed white teeth that were clearly designed for tearing flesh. Their bodies were thick and muscular, built for violence. And strangest of all, Crix could feel electromagnetic fields coming from their brains, like they were constantly ready for mental warfare. "Welcome aboard the Soul's Pride," said the human captain, a female with short dark hair and cold eyes. "I'm Captain Li Haijin. Are you all right?"
Yeah.
Crix struggled to stand up in his environmental suit, which was working at maximum power just to keep him alive. You're actually from a death world," he gasped. "The records were true. You're real monsters." Captain Li looked at her crew and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Earth is our home, yes. We understand you have a problem with some neighbors called the Morthok. They're destroying everything," Crix said, still fighting against the crushing gravity. "They've consumed 12 solar systems. Their bioships adapt to our weapons. We can't stop them." "Well," Captain Li said, walking over to a window that showed the ongoing battle, "let's see what these Morthok can do against Deathworld technology." She spoke. Crix saw more human ships moving into attack positions. Each one bristled with weapons that looked like they could crack planets. For the first time since the war began, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope Admiral Kim stood in the briefing room of the Iron Resolve, staring at the holographic display that showed the Morthok fleet in action. What he saw made his blood run cold, but not from fear, from excitement. These weren't ships in the traditional sense. They were massive living creatures floating through space, each one the size of a city back on Earth. "Those things are alive," said Commander Yoon, pointing at the largest bioship on the display. "Look at how it moves. It's not following physics like a normal spacecraft, swimming through space like a whale through water." Commander Thelis, who was still wearing his environmental suit to survive in the human ship, nodded sadly. Morthok evolved their ships instead of building them. Each vessel is a living organism that can think, adapt, and heal itself. When we damage them, they simply regrow the damaged parts. Kim watched as the hologram showed a Morthok bioship taking hits from Volani energy weapons. The creature's flesh bubbled and reformed, sealing the wounds within seconds. But that wasn't the worst part. As the bioship healed, it also spawned hundreds of smaller creatures that swarmed toward the Volani ships like angry insects. "They reproduce during battle," Thelis continued, his 4 eyes showing deep exhaustion. "Every time we fight them, they create more fighters. We lose ships, and they gain numbers. It's mathematically impossible for us to win." Captain Li, who had joined the briefing from her ship's Soul's Pride, studied the tactical data. "What? Your normal battle strategy?" she asked. "We use precision strikes," Thelis explained. "Our military doctrine has been refined over 3 centuries of civilized warfare. We target specific systems, disable enemy ships without destroying them, and minimize casualties on both sides. War should be quick, clean, and honorable. Captain Choi, whose heavy cruiser, Bison Thunder, was bristling with the most destructive weapons in the human fleet, laughed out loud. "You try not to kill the enemy?" "Of course," Thelis replied, looking confused. "Unnecessary death is barbaric. We fight to resolve conflicts, not to commit genocide." The human officers exchanged glances. Kim could see that his captains were thinking the same thing he was. These aliens had no idea what real war looked like. "Commander Thelis," Kim said slowly, "what are acceptable losses for a Villani military operation?" "Acceptable losses?" Thelis repeated. "I don't understand the question. How many of your people are you willing to sacrifice to achieve victory?" Captain Lee clarified. "Sacrifice?" Thelis's voice rose in shock. "We don't sacrifice our people. Every life is precious. If an operation would cost more than a few dozen casualties, we find another way." Kim looked around the room at his officers. Captain Yoon was shaking his head in disbelief. Commander Park was taking notes on his tablet, probably calculating how many human lives they'd need to spend to win this war. Commander Kim said gently in human military doctrine, "We understand that victory sometimes requires massive sacrifice. We're prepared to lose thousands, even millions of people, if that's what it takes to protect our civilization." Thelis stepped back, as if Kim had slapped him. That's monstrous. How can you place so little value on life?" "Because we place greater value on survival," Kim replied. "We'd rather lose half our fleet and win the war than lose our entire civilization trying to fight clean." "But that's barbaric," Thelis whispered. "Yes," Kim agreed without hesitation. "It is barbaric. But it's also effective. Your enemy doesn't care about honor or minimizing casualties. They want to eat your entire species. You can't fight monsters." With gentle tactics, Captain Choi pulled up another display showing human military history. "We've been fighting wars on our world for thousands of years. We've learned that sometimes the only way to stop a greater evil is to become a smaller one." Thelis looked at the data showing human conflicts throughout history. The numbers were staggering. Humans had fought wars that killed millions of their own kind, and they had done it repeatedly. "Show us everything you know about the Morthok," Kim ordered. "Their weaknesses, their tactics, their homeworlds. We'll demonstrate how Deathworlders fight a war." As the briefing continued, Thelis realized he might have made a terrible mistake. He'd called for monsters to save his people, but he was starting to understand that the cure might be worse than the disease. The Morthok biofleet approached Villani Colony 7 like a swarm of angry insects. 50 massive living ships, each one pulsing with organic energy, moved in their perfect formation. They had destroyed hundreds of Villani fleets using this exact same strategy. The bioships would absorb the enemy's energy weapons, adapt to their technology, and then overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But as they entered the battle zone, something was different. The human fleet was waiting for them in a completely strange formation. Instead of the elegant lines that civilized races used, the human ships were scattered randomly across space. Some were hiding behind asteroids, others were moving in unpredictable patterns, and a few were positioned so close to each other that they almost looked like they were planning to crash. "Target the lead bioship," Captain Yoon ordered from the bridge of his destroyer, Inchin's Fury. "All ships prepare for nuclear barrage." The Morthok bioships opened their energy absorption organs, ready to drink in the familiar beams of light that all civilized races used for weapons, had done this dance 1,000 times before. Instead, they were hit by something they had never experienced in their entire evolutionary history. Nuclear fire. Captain Yoon's destroyer squadron launched 72 fusion missiles in the first 3 seconds of combat. Each missile carried a warhead that contained the same destructive power as a small star. The missiles weren't elegant or precise like civilized weapons. They were crude, brutal, designed for one purpose: to completely destroy anything they touched. The first bioship tried to absorb the incoming energy, but nuclear fusion wasn't something that could be absorbed. It was raw destruction turned into a weapon. The creature's organic hull simply vaporized, taking half the ship with it. The bioship's death scream echoed through space as it broke apart. Direct hit on Target 1, reported Lieutenant Park from the Iron Resolve. The bioship is completely destroyed. Admiral Kim watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Morthok were already confused and panicking. They'd never faced weapons that were designed to destroy rather than disable. Target their central cluster, Kim ordered calmly. All ships, full broadside. The massive Iron Resolve turned its weapons toward the largest group of bioships. The human dreadnought carried more firepower than most civilized races used in entire wars.
Algon turrets
That could fire metal slugs at nearly the speed of light. Plasma cannons that burned hotter than the surface of stars. Missile tubes loaded with nuclear warheads that could crack planets, all of them fired at once. The sound was terrifying even in the vacuum of space. The ship's hull groaned under the stress of unleashing every weapon simultaneously. Warning lights flashed on the bridge as the Iron Resolve's own armor cracked from the recoil. The railgun slugs hit first, traveling so fast that they punched completely through the bioships before the creatures even knew they were under attack. The plasma cannons followed, scorching everything that survived the initial impact. Finally, the nuclear missiles arrived, turning the entire area into a miniature sun. 12 Morthok bioships died in the first 5 seconds. The surviving bioships began to flee, their neural networks screaming warnings to the rest of the fleet. But the humans weren't finished. Captain Lee's soul's pride had been waiting in ambush behind a large asteroid. As the retreating bioships passed by, she activated her ship's most dangerous weapon. Antimatter torpedoes, full spread, she ordered. The torpedoes created explosions that turned matter itself into energy. When they hit the fleeing bioships, the creatures simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not killed, but completely removed from reality. Commander Thelis watched the entire battle from his position on the Iron Resolve's bridge. He had seen many battles during his military career, but nothing like this. The humans weren't just fighting the Morthok, they were annihilating them. "Admiral," he said quietly, "your ship is damaged. This weapon's hurt your own vessel." Kim glanced at the damage reports flowing across his screens. 3 of the Iron Resolve's armor plates had cracked. 2 railgun turrets were offline. The fusion reactor was operating at dangerous levels. "Acceptable losses," Kim replied without emotion. "But your crew could have been killed," Thelis protested. "War requires sacrifice," Kim said, watching as the last Morthok bioship disappeared into hyperspace. "We're willing to damage our own ships if it means destroying the enemy." For the first time in the war, the Morthok fleet was retreating. Bioships that escaped carried a terrifying message back to their empire. The Forbidden System had released its monsters, and they fought like demons from the deepest hell. The Morthok Empire's response to their first defeat was swift and terrifying. Deep within their home system, the Hive Lords awakened from their century-long slumber. These weren't ordinary bioships. They were living mountains that had been growing for thousands of years, each one capable of devouring entire star systems. "Admiral." Kim watched through the main view screen as reality itself seemed to tear open. The hyperspace portals that formed were massive, bigger than anything the humans had ever seen. And from each portal emerged something that defied comprehension. "All the gods," whispered Commander Thelis, his 4 eyes wide with terror. "They've awakened the Hive Lords." The first bio-titan to emerge was the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered in millions of tentacles that writhed through space like living cables. Each tentacle was several kilometers long and thick, enough to wrap around a battleship. The creature's mouth opened to reveal row after row of teeth that could grind planets into dust. "Sir, I'm reading biosignatures that are off the charts," reported Lieutenant Park, his hands shaking as he worked. "The sensor controls. That thing is more alive than an entire forest. And there are 5 more coming through the portals." Captain Song's voice crackled over the communication system from his cruiser Inchin's Fury. "Admiral, we're directly in the path of the lead. Bio-Titan. It's trying to eat my ship." Kim could see the massive creature's tentacles reaching out toward the human fleet. Each tentacle moved with impossible speed, grasping for the small metal ships like a child reaching for toys. But these weren't toys. These were warships carrying thousands of human crew members. All ships, open fire, Kim commanded. Target the tentacles first, then go for the main body. The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Nuclear missiles exploded against the Bio-Titan's flesh, creating wounds that should have killed any normal creature. But the Hive Lord simply absorbed the damage and kept growing. Railgun slugs that could punch through starship armor bounced off its hide like raindrops. "It's adapting to our weapons," Captain Lee reported from Soul's Pride. "Every time we hit, it gets stronger." The Bio-Titan's tentacles wrapped around Captain Song's cruiser, pulling it slowly toward the creature's enormous mouth. Kim could hear the metal hull creaking and groaning under the pressure. In minutes, the Inchin's fury would be crushed like an empty can. "Captain Song, status report," Kim called out. "Sir, we're trapped," Song replied calmly. "The creature has us in its grip. We can't break free. Then retreat, abandon ship, and teleport to the nearest vessel." "Negative, sir. If we abandon ship, this thing will just grab another one. Someone has to stop it." Kim felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what Song was thinking. Protocol 7 was humanity's most desperate tactic, used only when facing impossible odds. It was also a death sentence for everyone involved. "Captain Song, do not implement Protocol 7, Kim ordered. "That's a direct command." "Sir, with respect. 800 lives to save the entire fleet is a good trade," Song replied. "My crew agrees. We're going to ram this thing." Kim watched helplessly as the Inchin's Fury's engines suddenly flared to maximum power. Instead of trying to escape from the Bio-Titan's grip, Song was using the creature's own tentacles to pull his ship directly into its mouth. "All crew brace for impact," Song announced over the fleet communication system. "It's been an honor serving with you all." The cruiser disappeared into the Bio-Titan's maw like a small fish being swallowed by a whale. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's entire body began to glow from within. Song had detonated his ship's fusion core inside the Bio-Titan's brain cavity. The explosion tore the monster apart from the inside, sending chunks of organic matter flying in all directions. The other Hive Lords recoiled in shock as their leader died in nuclear fire. The dying Bio-Titan's final thought was transmitted to the entire Morthok fleet. The Deathworlders fight with suicide tactics. They value victory over survival. "Commander." Thelis stared at the debris field where Captain Song's ship had been. 800 humans had just died to kill one enemy. In Vellani society, such a sacrifice would be considered monstrous. But the humans around him showed no horror, only grim determination. "Sir, the other Bio-Titans are retreating," reported Lieutenant Park. "Good," Kim replied coldly. "Signal the fleet. Any ship that gets grabbed implements Protocol 7 immediately." For the first time in their billion-year history, the Morthok Empire felt something they had never experienced before. Fear of something smaller than themselves. The message from the front lines reached Earth in less than 12 hours through the quantum communication network. Admiral Kim's report was brief but clear. Humanity was at war with an alien empire that wanted to consume all life in the galaxy. The response from Earth was immediate and terrifying. President Chen called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. Within 6 hours, every major nation on Earth had agreed to something that hadn't happened since the Third World War: total military mobilization. Every factory, every shipyard, every research facility was converted to military production. Admiral Kim stood on the observation deck of the Iron Resolve, watching the most incredible sight he had ever witnessed. The jump gates leading back to Earth were blazing with constant activity as ship after ship materialized in the Vellani system. Not just a few vessels, but entire fleets. "Sir, the 5th Fleet has arrived," reported Captain Lee, reading from her tactical display. "Admiral Han is requesting permission to deploy his dreadnoughts." Kim looked through the viewport at the massive ships emerging from the jump gate. Each dreadnought was twice the size of his flagship, covered in weapons that could level continents. But these weren't the elegant energy weapons that civilized races used. These were antimatter cannons that could turn entire moons into cosmic dust. "Grant permission," Kim replied. "What about the Seventh Fleet?" "Admiral Shin's fleet is taking position on the outer rim," Lee continued. "They're carrying the new planet killer missiles. 47 warheads, each one capable of cracking a world in half." Commander Thelis, who had been watching the human reinforcements arrive, turned to Kim with confusion in his 4 eyes. "Admiral, how many ships are you bringing to this battle?" "Current count is 312 vessels," Kim replied casually. "But more are coming. Earth is building new ships every day." 300 ships? Thelis gasped. "God. But that's larger than most civilized fleets in the entire galaxy. How can one world produce so many warships?" "It's because we're not just one world anymore," Kim explained. "We're an entire species focused on a single goal, winning this war. Every human factory is now making weapons. Every shipyard is building warships. Every scientist is developing new ways to kill the enemy." As if to prove his point, another group of ships emerged from the jump gate. These weren't regular military vessels. They were converted civilian ships, hastily armed with whatever weapons Earth's engineers could mount on them. Cargo haulers now carried nuclear missiles. Passenger liners had been fitted with railgun turrets. Even old mining ships had been turned into weapons of war. "Sir," Captain Lee said quietly, "I'm receiving a priority message from Earth Command. They're asking about the biological weapons program." Kim's expression darkened. "What about it?" "They want to know if we should deploy the virus bombs against the Morthok." The bridge fell silent. Even the human crew looked uncomfortable. The virus bombs were humanity's most terrible weapon, designed to target specific genetic markers and destroy entire species. They had been banned by every civilized nation on Earth after the African Plague War. "Full authorization for xenocide. Protocols," Lee continued, reading from her secure terminal. "Earth Command considers the Morthok an extinctional-level threat to all life in the galaxy." Commander Thelis couldn't understand what they were discussing, but he could feel the dark mood that had settled over the bridge. "What are xenocide protocols?" he asked. Kim turned to look at the Villani commander. "Complete extermination of an entire species. We don't just want to defeat the Morthok. We want to make sure they never exist again. But it's genocide." Thelis whispered. "Yes." Kim agreed without hesitation. "That's exactly what it is." The Villani delegation that had been staying aboard the human flagship listened in growing horror as the humans discussed the complete destruction of their enemies with the same casual tone they might use to plan a construction project. "Han is requesting target coordinates for the antimatter bombardment," reported Lieutenant Park. "He wants to know which Morthok worlds should be destroyed first." "Start with their nursery worlds," Kim replied. "Then move to their industrial centers. Save the homeworld for last." Commander Thelis felt sick. "You're talking about destroying entire planets. There might be billions of innocent creatures on those worlds." "There are no innocent Morthok," Kim said coldly. "They're all part of the same bio-network. Every single one of them is a potential threat to galactic civilization. This is how Deathworlders wage war," Kim explained, turning back to the viewport where more human ships were arriving every hour. "We don't just defeat our enemies. We remove them from existence. We make sure they can never threaten anyone ever again." As the human war machine continued to grow, Commander Thelis realized that his people had made a deal with creatures even more terrifying than the Morthok themselves. The human war machine rolled through Morthok territory like an unstoppable force of nature. What had once been the most feared empire in the galaxy was now burning. Planet after planet fell to the combined human Villani fleet, leaving nothing but scorched worlds and floating debris in their wake. Admiral Kim stood in the command center of the Iron Resolve, watching the tactical display show their relentless advance. Red markers indicated destroyed Morthok colonies. Yellow markers showed worlds under attack. The few remaining green markers were shrinking by the hour. "Sir, Captain Choi's Psychological Warfare Division is reporting complete success," announced Lieutenant Park. "We've been broadcasting the death screams of the Bio-Titans across all Morthok communication frequencies. The enemy's collective neural network is breaking down." Kim nodded with satisfaction. Captain Choi's idea had been brilliant in its cruelty. The Morthok bioships were all connected through a shared mental network. When one died, they all felt it. By broadcasting the final moments of their greatest warriors, the humans were driving the entire species into madness. The Morthok High Command is fragmenting, reported Intelligence Officer Kang, intercepting panic transmissions from their core worlds. They're arguing about whether to keep fighting or retreat to their home system. What's their current military strength? Kim asked. Down to less than 30% of their original fleet, Kong replied. Most of their bio-titans are dead. The smaller ships are fleeing in all directions. Commander Thelis watched the destruction with mixed feelings. His people were finally winning the war, but the price was horrifying. Entire worlds that had existed for millions of years were being turned into dead rocks. The humans didn't just defeat their enemies, they erased them completely. Admiral Kim's communication officer called out, "We're receiving messages from all fleet commanders. They're requesting new orders." Kim studied the galactic map one more time. The Morthok Empire was broken, but not completely destroyed. Few core worlds remained, along with enough bioships to potentially rebuild their forces given time. That was unacceptable. Signal all fleet commanders, Kim ordered. We're implementing the Scorched Galaxy Protocol. The bridge fell silent. Even the human crew looked uncomfortable. The Scorched Galaxy Protocol was humanity's most extreme military doctrine, complete annihilation of an enemy species and their entire civilization. "Sir," Captain Lee said quietly, "are you sure about this? The Morthok are already defeated." "Defeated isn't enough," Kim replied coldly. "As long as even one Morthok survives, they can rebuild. We're going to finish this properly." The human fleet split into dozens of smaller hunter-killer squadrons, each one targeting specific Morthok worlds. Admiral Han's dreadnoughts went after the industrial centers, using their antimatter cannons to turn factory worlds into cosmic dust. Admiral Shin's planet killers targeted the nursery worlds where young Morthok were being raised. Captain Yoon's fast attack squadrons hunted down fleeing bioships, making sure none escaped to spread the Morthok infection to other parts of the galaxy. Within 3 weeks, the empire that had terrorized civilized space for thousands of years was reduced to a handful of desperate survivors hiding in their home system. "Sir," Lieutenant Park announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Morthok homeworld. They're requesting terms for surrender." Kim looked at the message on his screen. The Morthok High Command was begging for mercy, offering to give up their military technology and retreat to a single world. They promised never to attack other species again. "Conditional surrender only," Kim replied without hesitation. "Total disarmament, species-wide sterilization to prevent reproduction, and permanent monitoring by human forces." Commander Thelis couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Admiral, you're talking about genocide, complete extinction of an entire species." "That's correct," Kim said, turning to face the Villani commander. "The Morthok have proven that they're a threat to all life. In the galaxy, the only way to ensure galactic peace is to make sure they never exist again." "But they're surrendering," Thelis protested. "They're beaten. You don't need to kill them all." "Commander, your people thought the same thing about the Morthok 300 years ago," Kim replied. "You defeated them in battle, accepted their surrender, and allowed them to keep existing. How did that work out for you?" Thelis had no answer. The Morthok had indeed surrendered centuries ago, only to return stronger and more vicious than ever. "This is what it means to be a Deathworlder," Kim explained. "We don't just win wars, we end them permanently, make sure our enemies can never threaten anyone ever again." As the human fleet moved toward the Morthok homeworld for the final battle, Commander Thelis wondered if his people had traded one nightmare for another. The Morthok were monsters, but at least they were predictable monsters. The humans were something far more terrifying, monsters with intelligence, technology, and the absolute conviction that they were doing the right thing. The final battle for the ROS homeworld lasted only 4 hours. When it was over, the oldest and most feared empire in galactic history had been completely destroyed. The last Morthok bioship, transmitted a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. We surrender unconditionally to the Deathworlders, the transmission said, broadcast on every frequency to every civilized world. We beg the galaxy's forgiveness for forcing them to emerge from their quarantine. Admiral Kim stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, watching through the main view screen as the remaining Morthok bioships began to self-destruct in perfect formations. The creatures were killing themselves rather than face capture by the humans. In their final moments, they had chosen death over the mercy of Deathworlders. "It's over," said Captain Lee, reading the tactical display. "The last Morthok stronghold has fallen. There are no more bioships on our sensors." Kim nodded slowly. After months of brutal warfare, the galaxy's greatest threat had been eliminated. But as he looked at the debris field that had once been the Morthok homeworld, he realized that the real war was just beginning. Sir Lieutenant Park called out from his communication station. "We're receiving priority transmissions from across the galaxy. Every major civilization is trying to contact us." "What do they want?" Kim asked. Sir. The Galactic Council is requesting an immediate meeting. They want to discuss coexistence with humanity." Kim almost laughed. For centuries, the galactic community had avoided Earth like a plague world. They had classified humans as dangerous monsters and forbidden any contact with Sol System. Now, after seeing what those monsters could do when unleashed, they wanted to talk. "Tell them we'll consider it," Kim said. "But make it very clear that Earth now considers itself the protector of peaceful species throughout the galaxy." "Whether they want our protection or not?" Captain Lee asked. Whether they want it or not, Kim confirmed Commander Thelis had been quietly watching the human officers discuss the future of galactic civilization. His people had gotten what they wanted. The Morthok Empire was destroyed, and the Volani were safe. But the cost was becoming clear. Admiral Thelis said carefully, "What happens now? Will your people return to Earth?" Kim turned to look at the Volani commander. "Commander, do you really think we're going to go back to our little corner of the galaxy and pretend this never happened? We've seen what's out here. We've seen how weak and unprepared the civilized races are. But the war is over," Thelis protested. "The Morthok are gone. The Morthok are gone," Kim agreed. "But what about the next threat? What about the species that comes after them? The galaxy is full of dangers, Commander. Someone needs to be ready to face them." Through the view screen, Thelis could see human ships taking positions around Volani. Worlds, they weren't leaving. They were staying to protect his people, whether the Volani wanted protection or not. "The Galactic Council won't accept human authority," Thelis said. "They'll resist. Then they'll learn the same lesson the Morthok learned," Kim replied coldly. "We're not asking for permission, Commander. We're telling them how things are going to be." More human ships continued to arrive through the jump gates, spreading throughout the galaxy like a slow infection. Earth's war machine had been fully awakened, and it wasn't going back to sleep. "Sir," reported Intelligence Officer Kang, "we're detecting movement in the Zephyrian system. It looks like they're mobilizing their fleet, probably planning to challenge our authority," Captain Lee observed. "Then we'll remind them what happened to the last species that challenged us," Kim said. "Signal Admiral Han. Tell him to take the 5th Fleet to Zephyrian space. If they want to test Deathworlder resolve, we'll be happy to demonstrate it." Commander Thelis realized that his people had made a deal with creatures far more dangerous than the Morthok had ever been. The Morthok wanted to consume the galaxy. The humans wanted to rule it. And unlike the Morthok, the humans had the power to make their dreams reality. The Deathworlders had emerged from their forbidden system. They were never going back. The galaxy had a new master, and that master carried nuclear weapons and fought wars with the cold efficiency of machines. Humanity had arrived. Nothing would ever be the same again.